All right, guys, so today we're going to be talking about posterior pelvic tilt in hitting. So the first thing that I want to do is go through exactly what it is. So posterior pelvic tilt is simply the position that your pelvis is on right here. So something that you can do to visualize this is if I go and take my hands, put them straight out here. If we're in a neutral position, right, we want our pelvis to be flat. So if we think about the pelvis as having water in it, right, and it's like a bowl. If we tip it forward, water is going to fall at the front. If we tip it backward, water is then going to follow backwards. So in a resting position, we want to be roughly in neutral so that water isn't falling out either the front or the back side. Now, what posterior pelvic tilt is taking and tipping your pelvis this way so that water falls out the back side. So if I'm standing here, my hands pointing forward, right, flat, posterior pelvic tilt is that. So you can see this goes backward, right, and it's tilting that pelvis backwards so that water can fall at the backside. Now the opposite of that is anterior pelvic tilt. So that would look like this, right? So anterior, where it goes down a little bit, and then posterior, where it comes up a little bit. So it's just being able to shift that pelvis either anteriorly or posteriorly. So that's what posterior pelvic tilt is. Now, how that plays into the swing. So if you, let's say, finish your deadlift, right, and at the top you squeeze your glutes as hard as you can. What squeezing your glutes does is take you into a little bit of posterior pelvic tilt and really activates that posterior chain. Now, when we're going forward in our stride, right when we're hitting, we want to be able to carry ourselves forward, control our stride with our posterior chain instead of with our quads. Because what actually happens is if our quads or the anterior side of our body takes over that portion of our stride, it becomes more of a vertical push instead of a ride out here where we can control our stride forward. So as we said, when we finish the deadlift, we get into a little bit of posterior pelvic tilt at the top, and that activates our posterior chain. So in order to control our forward move or our stride with our posterior chain, we want to be able to have a little bit of that posterior pelvic tilt. So, I mean, you can see a couple guys do this really well. Justin Turner, Bryce Harper are two really good examples. But what you'll see with them is for Turner, if he starts here, he even starts in a little bit of posterior pelvic tilt, right? You can tell that he just tucks his pelvis just a little bit. He's kind of in this position here. Then as he picks up, right, he's maintaining that posterior pelvic tilt. So what that does is here, now my posterior chain is activated and I can carry myself forward in my stride with that posterior pelvic tilt, with that posterior chain. So just something to be aware of is it's easy to start there, right? But then it's sometimes it's hard to feel yourself maintain that as you move forward. So let's say that you start in that posterior pelvic tilt, but once you pick your leg up, you let that go, you release, and you go into anterior pelvic tilt again, right? So it's just having that body awareness to go, all right, I'm gonna start here. As I pick up, I almost want to feel like I'm crunching a little bit because that's going to help that feel. Maintaining that crunch as I move forward and then throughout my rotation. So that's posterior pelvic tilt, why we like to use it in the swing, and now we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to assess it and then also improve it. How we're going to assess and then also work to improve this is going to be the same thing. So what we're going to do is attach a band to a squat rack. We're going to get inside that band. And what this band is going to do is assist and also resist us going into anterior and posterior pelvic tilt, right? So if I pull myself out a little ways from that band and put it right across my hip bone here in the front, now what that's going to do is pull me, right? Pull me into a little bit of anterior pelvic tilt here. So if we're trying to work on posterior pelvic tilt, all we got to do is now try to work against that band, and it's going to help increase feel because there's increased resistance, right? But we don't want this lower back to really move. Instead, we want to just move our pelvis against that band. So it's going to be very subtle. that action right there where you're just tucking your pelvis down and under here. So that's going against the band into posterior pelvic tilt. You can also use it to help you feel anterior pelvic tilt. If I go here, right, so this is about neutral, if I then go into anterior pelvic tilt, the band is assisting me getting there. So what you want to do is whichever one you struggle with, either anterior or posterior pelvic tilt, you want to have the band assist you to start. Once you get a good feel for that type of movement with your pelvis, then you're going to go and have it resist you. So we can also go backwards against the band here. Again, same level. Now what this is doing is actually assisting me in a little bit of posterior pelvic tilt, right? It's easier for me to get this action here, and now it's harder for me to go into anterior pelvic tilt here because the band is now resisting me. So if you notice that anterior posterior pelvic tilt is something that you have trouble either controlling or getting range of motion in, this is one thing you can do to work on that aspect of your movement.